Hello everyone, welcome to the first of my tier list videos for the current meta on JP. I'm going to do 4 of these videos, one for each role. There's kind of too many units now to sort of do them all at once, so I'm just going to separate them out and compare them against other units in their role. I'm going to try and do these every couple of months to sort of keep you up to date on where I personally feel like a lot of the units are. And yeah, I hope that's interesting to you all. So as far as, the criteria for these tiers go, I'm going to have, 5 tiers, S, A, B, C, and D. The placements in these tiers will be based on my personal feeling of the current meta in the Japanese version of the game. So we're a few months ahead of global right now. We have a lot more characters, and a lot of things have changed as well. Some notable things for attackers especially is the addition of the critical damage trait. This trait at level 5 gives 60% bonus damage to your critical strikes. This means that attackers that have crits baked into their kit are a lot more valuable than attackers that don't. And if you don't have one of those attackers, you will need, say, a critical supporter, such as Bolt Resna or some of the ones upcoming like Flock and Rorona. So that's very important to notice. There's also just kind of a general trend in the game where area attackers are a bit more useful than single target attackers just because of the content that's been released over the past few months. Area attackers have consistently proven just much stronger as all-rounders than single target attackers. I will not be considering affinity tower potential in these rankings. I don't really like affinity tower usefulness in rankings. I think it's a little weird because a lot of times units are good in affinity tower specifically because of no other options, and that's not really a good measure of their objective strength in the rest of the game. And also affinity tower on JP is honestly kind of trivial content nowadays, believe it or not, so that's just the way it goes. The power creep be power creeping. There is one other thing that has been added to the Japanese server recently that will affect the tiering, and that is the Roman tournament. Now, this is a scoreboard style ranking where you're competing against the rest of the server to do the most damage in the given battle for the week. Our first week is slash focused. This is the first week, and whoever does the most damage, gets the top scores. Unfortunately, I'm missing some key characters for this, so I actually just don't have the ability to get a good ranking. I might try a bit more, but it's a little demotivating to not have the right characters. So my rank is pretty low, but this being another, facet of the end game in Resleri will affect how certain characters rank as well. And if I'm giving a character their rating because of the Roman tournament specifically, I will let you know. But yeah, it's just another thing that affects character rankings. So without further ado, let's just get into it. I will try not to dwell on any of the characters too much, especially the ones that we already have on global. If you do want to know more about their kits, more in depth and stuff, I have videos for every single character in this list. Some of them, like the release pool ones, may be in previous tier lists that I've made in the past and not specific videos just for them, but all of the banner units for sure I have videos on, and I will have videos again on them when they come to global. So let's just run through these real quick. We have the good old reliable base Resna, the 1-star Resna that you start with, and she's going to go straight into B tier. B is kind of middle of the road, and units in B tier are, in my opinion, good units. I'm going to try and be kind of strict with the tiering. I only want a few units up in this S tier, so B tier units, in my opinion, are good. And the reason why I think Resna gets B tier over C tier is mostly because of the power of AoE and the fact that you get her to 5 stars for free, and that's a really big deal for increasing the power of her burst, right? A level 5 burst is about 25% stronger than a level 1 burst, so those stars are very, very important for area attackers for their bursts. and it has a pretty easy to meet condition in general. It just gets 40% extra damage if she's attacking weakness, and you can clear a lot of content with her. She is a very solid, reliable attacker. She's going to be fairly middle of the pack. And then for these units here, Cordelia, Tau, everyone knows they're pretty bad, just 1-star attackers. You don't really feel like using them. They're not very great. Cordelia especially, her only usefulness in my opinion is poison floors and affinity tower, and that's just forced usefulness. It doesn't actually make her a good unit. She feels bad to use. In fact, I think she's much worse than Tau. I would put Tau at the top of the D tier, and in fact I would put even Vayne and Vo below, probably around this order in the D tier. Tau being the best out of them in my opinion. But yeah, there's our D tier. So C tier for ruven in my opinion. Now this one's a little bit funny. Like I mentioned before, the Roman tournament, ruven being a single target attacker, and Roman tournament currently being one of the few things in the game that really benefits single target attackers. Single target attackers are really good in there because you're trying to get max damage against a single infinite HP enemy. And because the current week is slash, ruven has actually been very strong in there for a lot of people if they don't have better options. So ruven still gets C tier despite being good in that specific content, because it's not that he is a particularly strong single target attacker. It is just that because the element matches, he can, do well enough in that content. In any other content in the game, you really don't want to be using him if you can avoid it. He's just not that great. And kind of the same deal with esty, but she ends up a bit worse because she is a rampy character with really slow ramp, and slow ramp it's not good in this game. Next we have Mew. So before I've put Mew in the lowest tier, she is a bit higher now, in my opinion, and the main reason for that is because we have so many ways to scale damage nowadays in this game that any area attacker is going to be at the very least serviceable as a main attacker for your team in a lot of content. We have so many supporters, defenders, items, so much better gear that we can actually take her mediocre damage and make her good enough to clear things. However, it's not going to get her out of the C tier. It just keeps her out of the bottom tier. She might be C+ tier. You could make an argument to get her to B- tier, I think, but she is still overall a fairly weak character, so C tier she goes. And next we have Firis. So Firis is a unit I have rated highly on release because she is more than good enough for all release content. However, she has not really kept up at all, and her weaknesses are even more glaring than ever, with the 275 wait time on her skill making her absurdly slow, the slowest unit in the game, and her damage numbers just aren't there. The knockback isn't a good enough of a compensation, so Firis is going to get the C tier nowadays on JP, unfortunately. And next we have Ryza. Ryza is just solid single target damage. She is going to get B tier. Her damage is still good, but single target attackers are not amazing in the current meta, so Ryza will be getting that B tier, but she is still a solid unit. Rorona will also, between the B tier and the C tier, I don't really know. Probably B tier is fine for Rorona, but you really don't want to be using her much on JP. Odelia is going to get C tier. The condition for extra damage on her burst is basically impossible to meet in any scenario, and the fact that she doesn't get, 5-star for free makes her area burst weaker than Resna in general, unless you really invest in her with pieces, but you don't really want to do that. She's mostly just used for paralysis floors and tower, and even then, I haven't used her in a paralysis floor in ages. So nowadays you can get away without using her a lot of the times. I didn't even use her when I did Bolt Tower, so yeah, she's kind of whatever. Not getting free pieces really hurts her compared to Resna, and also the condition on her burst just being so hard to meet. Yeah, she's a pretty mediocre unit in general. And then logy. Logy's going to get B for similar reasons to Resna. The condition on his burst is much easier to meet, and it's still a very solid area burst, and he is a unit that's fairly worth putting pieces into, because for a long time he was the premier physical area attacker. That is not the case anymore. If that was still the case, he would get A tier, but because that's not the case anymore, logy gets put down to B tier. And Fizz has a few things going for it over Magic. Magic may be the current meta on JP, but Fizz does have better support units such as Ompel, who is really strong. There are just other things going for Magic as well that make Magic better in general, but logy is a very strong unit. He still is a very strong unit, and he comfortably slides into B tier. Then we have the 1-star Val. She's honestly not very good. The crit rate on her skills isn't reliable. They're not very powerful, but she is kind of better than these units here. She's kind of at the bottom of C tier, I think. She's really a lot weaker than she kind of seems, in my opinion. And whenever I use her, she doesn't feel very good to use, I think, because you really want those crits on her, but her crit rates are not that high, so it's really hard to rely on them, and she just ends up feeling like a very lackluster unit. And then we have, you know, the other version of Val, the sleeveless version, and she's going to be B tier nowadays. I know some of you may have disagreed with my rating on her in the past when she came out. I said she was the strongest attacker. I still think that's true. When she came out, she was the strongest attacker. However, you did have to play her right. She is a burst-focused character. She requires burst. She requires, you know, getting buffed for those bursts, and she is a single target attacker. I think she is still very strong and capable of clearing lots of content. In fact, up until very recently, she was the best attacker in my roster, and I cleared basically everything with her for a long time. She's really, really, really good. But nowadays, the game is a little less burst focused for attackers. Skill 2s have been a lot better in recent times with a lot of the more recent units, and her niche just isn't quite as useful anymore. It's we can get really crazy damage numbers without relying on her burst. All that setup, we can get it more reliably. So yeah, this version of Val is a little bit weaker than she used to be. Next we have Meru. Once again, I don't think she's a very good attacker. She gets a lot of turns without any payoff for it, so she's just not really worth using. Wolbill's gonna get B tier. She is a solid area attacker, but one thing that area attackers really need is either a lot of damage or ways to crit, and she doesn't quite have either of those, so she's gonna get the B tier. Next we have Soeur. We're gonna just go ahead and slide Soeur into the C tier. Her condition isn't terrible to meet, but she's just, and she does good damage. She's one of the stronger units in the C tier. She just isn't quite strong enough. Actually, if I'm putting Soeur in C tier, would I put Rorona there too? Probably. All right, Rorona's gonna slide in there. They're probably pretty similar in power level as single target attackers, but the power is just not quite there, especially for how awkward it is to keep her condition up, but she's still very decent. All right, and finally we're at Yjuna, and Yjuna's still S tier, to no one's surprise at all. She is one of the premier area attackers with a really, really strong single target burst, and both of these things are still true. She gets absolutely crazy amounts of damage from her passive and her skill 2. Her burst having guaranteed crits on it is always really, really nice. With all that crit damage she gets, Yjuna is still just very strong and capable of clearing a lot of the hardest content in the game. Next we have Christmas Resna, and Christmas Resna is going to go right up here into A. Having those guaranteed crits on her burst as an AoE burst is huge. Because of the way crits roll in this game, it's rolled per target, so having very high or guaranteed crit chance is really, really useful for area bursts. So Christmas Resna still quite strong. There are other characters with higher damage potential than her, like Logy probably ideally has higher damage potential than Christmas Resna, but the ease of use of Christmas Resna and the opportunities she opens up in your team building just makes her a really feel-good unit to use and really, really strong. Quite good. So next we have New Year's Mari, another one of these really high tier attackers. I've debated a lot between whether I think she belongs in S or A tier. And personally, I kind of want to put her in the S tier. However, I think objectively she's more like A plus tier for a couple of reasons. One, she really relies on having Ellie. And if you don't know why that is, it's because of leader skills. Ellie's leader skills synergizes very well with her. Leader skills are something that will be coming to global sometime next month, I believe. But yeah, she really relies on having Ellie to show her true potential, and she is a single target attacker. While she is one of the best single target attackers in the game, being able to do massive amounts of damage without bursts, which is really nice, and having guaranteed crits if you have her buffs up. She is still a single target attacker, and while I do like using her team, she is one of the characters I use the most on JP personally. She's not very good in dungeons, and that's kind of really what brings her down to me. It's very difficult to make her do well in dungeons because you don't have time to really do a lot of single target damage in dungeons because the enemies will just start taking you out. And especially a lot of the recent dungeons where enemy damage is very, very high. And because Ellie is required to be on the team, your team building is a little constrained. You don't have very many options. It's very difficult to fit in a second attacker to sort of make up for her weaknesses. So I think that really does drop her down to A tier. However, she does do a lot of damage and is capable of tackling a lot of really hard content as a solo attacker. So she is quite powerful. And she is kind of near the top of A tier, so she's very good. Next we have Roman. Roman's going to get into the B tier. Kind of similar to Ryza, he is a fairly strong single target attacker, kind of similar to Valeria. He's quite burst focused and a bit rampy, but he ramps up fairly quick and can get really high damage numbers out, so he is pretty solid. Next we have Yjuna. Yuna's kind of weird, but I think I'm going to go ahead and put her in C. She is a stab attacker. She'll be in the next banner on global, and her gimmick just isn't really very useful in general. Yuna's main gimmick is executing enemies, so she gets damage boosts if enemies are at 50% HP or lower. And with how single target attackers are supposed to work in this game, where they really need to be killing things quickly or one-shotting them, the damage Yjuna gets just doesn't really mesh with that goal, right? She's getting damage from attacking low HP enemies, where you don't really have damage problems anymore anyways. So yeah, I don't think she's very good. Next up is Roseval, and some of you may recall in my last video about upcoming banners that I said Roseval was an A tier unit. And in fact, I revised that, and I'm going to go ahead and put her in S tier. And the reason for this is actually because of the Roman tournament. So Roseval is a very strong single target attacker. She has guaranteed crits on her skill 2 and her burst, which is really nice, especially because of the critical damage trait. So she can do a lot of damage right off the bat, and she is a rampy attacker, so she gets, extra crit damage and extra burst damage from her passive, up to like 100% crit damage and 200% burst skill damage or something crazy like that. So she does a lot of damage when she's ramped up. It ramps up pretty quickly because she gets stacks for using her skills and also for defeating enemies. So ramping quickly isn't really a problem. But the biggest difference between her and a lot of other ramping characters, other than ramping quickly, is that when she is, ramped up, and she starts bursting, she just gets a ton of turns because her burst creates a new panel for her with an extra turn. It's not faster speed, it literally creates an entire new panel in the timeline, and this can be very useful. Along with the guaranteed crits and everything, she just feels really good to use when she's ramped up. She's an absolute powerhouse. And the biggest thing is that she is really competitive in the Roman tournament. I think if it wasn't for the Roman tournament, I'd put her down in A tier. However, despite being a strike attacker, she is one of the top attackers for the slash-based Roman tournament, and that is a big deal. If you don't know, the tournament, the enemy you're doing damage to has minus 100% slash resist and 0% in every other resist. So slash characters are doing double damage baseline, and Rose of Valyria still competes. In fact, she might even be the best, but I'm not sure because none of the top players have uploaded their videos, but she is still very competitive. So yeah, she's going to be a force to be reckoned with in Roman tournaments in the future, even off element, which really makes her like a high tier pick. Very strong, solid single target attacker. I think she would be much more even with Mari if it wasn't for the Roman tournament. She's still quite strong. Single target attackers are just kind of limited usefulness in this game. It is what it is. You have to be really good to get up in these high tiers, in my opinion. And next we have Rose Soeur. She's a bit of a funny one. Her kit's kind of, I think it's really cool. It's just not strong enough. She has good damage values on her skill 2 and her burst for a single target attacker. At the end of the day, she is a single target attacker. However, she does have some nice stuff going for her. After she uses her skill 2, she's guaranteed to dodge the next hit she would take, which is really nice. And also, whenever your team uses items, her next attack will knock back the enemy. So, and she doesn't have a wait time penalty like Firis does. So she does have knockback and dodge in one unit, also with decent damage, but at the end of the day she is still just a single target attacker, so she's going to go ahead and get in the B tier, unfortunately. But she is kind of cool. She's just not a super strong, compelling unit, but she's not bad. And next up we have Academy Resna. Academy Resna is arguably the strongest unit in the game right now. She is just a really, really good area attacker that can create her own guaranteed crits and just does a ton of damage, especially when combined with her signature weapon, which can give her like 80% critical damage just from the weapon effect. And there's also an armor that will buff that will give received buff effect on her. She gets extra effect from blue panels, and all of this just sort of like adds together to being able to give her a ton of damage, even without characters like Academy Ryza and Academy Sophie to sort of prop her up. And the big reason why she can stand on her own is because not only can she create her own blue panels, because she is based around having blue panels. If you don't have her on a blue panel, she does no damage, because the blue panel gives her guaranteed crits. It gives her like 100% skill damage, but she can create her own blue panels with S1, and actually they did end up adding an item that also creates blue panels, so she can throw an item to create a blue panel that she can stand on and get all those bonuses from as well. So yeah, Academy Resna, really quite powerful. She does more area damage than yjuna for sure, and she in fact does so much damage that she can just clear like basically anything in like 6 turns. That's a little bit of an exaggeration, but it's not completely wrong either. She will be hitting in the millions with her skill 2. It's pretty wild. So yeah, very, very, very strong attacker. And then next we have Erin, one of the new characters from the Academy event, a gender bent version of Sterk, in fact. And she is also a wind attacker, just like Academy Resna, but she is a single target version, and her kit is actually very reminiscent of Princess Merumerumerumeru. However, it doesn't fall into all of the same traps that Princess Merumerumeru did. In fact, Erin, while she does have lower damage rates to compensate for her skills being very fast, such as like, 360% or something damage on her burst, as opposed to the standard 5%, she can still get pretty good damage when she ramps up. Her passive skill gives her 10% magic attack every time she gets healed, so it stacks up to like 100%, and she can start doing a lot of damage, even with those lower damage rates on her skill 2 and burst to make up for her lower wait time and higher speed. However, she is still a rampy single target attacker. She's not going to come out of the gate swinging, and that's kind of a real problem for single target, and one of the reasons Mari is so strong and Roseval is so strong. Yeah, so maybe she will prove me wrong in like an upcoming Roman tournament or something, but I'm going to go ahead and put her in the B tier as well. Her damage is absolutely up there, but it takes a while to ramp. It's not like super amazing, and I haven't seen anything from her that impresses me just yet. And I know Rosval is a rampy character as well, but because of her guaranteed crits, she does a lot of damage right away. Even before ramping. The guaranteed crits on her skills are a huge factor in making her kit as good as it is. So, and last but definitely not least, we have Lanze, who has finally joined us in chapter 12. He is the most recent addition to the roster, and he is going to get an A tier. He is quite a solid unit indeed, and the main reason for that is his area burst as a physical attacker. So he is our second area burst in physical attackers, the first being Logy, and they finally add another one with Lanze. He's also slash. So Lanze is kind of the reason that Logy has been superseded in his niche, because Lanze has an area burst that gets 100% damage if there are three or more targets. And when you're using that, you know, there's going to be that many targets usually, right? So it's just a free double damage on that burst, which is much stronger than Logy. He has much better stats. He has much better skill 1 and 2 with some sort of like weird counter like attack tank gimmick that also gives him crit chance and gives him physical attack. So not only is he buffing himself with these powerful buffs that really help his bursts pop off, he's just a really strong physical burst attacker. So yeah, Lanze is quite good indeed. And yeah, I'm feeling pretty happy with this setup. I didn't really put units into tiers beforehand, just kind of went off how I feel about them. I would say soeur and rorona are probably at, you know, they could go either way, like high C tier, low B tier, but I don't think they're quite good enough to push into B tier currently. And I did try to keep this list pretty strict so that you know who the absolute best of the best are. And in my opinion, it is these three and then these three. And you can't go wrong with any of these attackers. One of the sort of big things about attackers is that there's not really an attacker that's like one size fits all that can just clear all content in the game by themselves. I would say the closest to that is probably Academy Resna, because her damage really is quite frankly absurd. But you really do need to swap attackers based on content a lot of the time. So any of these attackers will definitely do you well. Ideally, you want 2 to 3 of these top ones. And then a lot of these ones in B tier are also quite serviceable. So, but yeah, that'll be it for that video. Let me know your thoughts and opinions in the comments. And once again, this is based on the current Japanese meta, not the current global meta. But it should look pretty similar, just maybe with some of these lower tier characters being up a little bit higher on global. But yeah, that's all for this one. I hope you enjoyed the video, and thanks for watching. I will see you in the next one. Bye-bye.